On this episode of Get Real with Casey Kasem, I sat down with Yahoo's Andy Behrens. This was so rad for me because I've been following Andy's work for a really long time. We had to talk about all kinds of stuff, including his thoughts on PPR, the very first time he played fantasy football, being a novelist, and a lot more. Make sure you check out Andy's work over with Yahoo Fantasy, as well as give him a follow on Twitter at Andy Behrens. Get Real is a part of the Dynasty Addicts podcast network. You can find my Twitter at @TheCaseyKasem, and you can find the podcast Twitter account at GetReal_pod. Check out my writing with the fantasy footballers and Fighting Chance Fantasy. And with that, I bring you my conversation with Andy Behrens. Hello.
Look, you're in a professional looking studio. That looks good. I like your setup.
Thanks. My wife messed with my computer, so give me just a second. There we go. Okay, the headphones weren't in.
They do that.
So how you doing? Everything good?
Yeah.
Good. Awesome. Can you hear me all right?
I can. You caught me. I was almost a full half through the Giants-Seahawks game on Game Pass. So you spared me that.
No, yes. I did not catch any of that game. Yeah. And
the Seahawks are rolling through the first drive of the game. Like it has the vibe of, like, I don't know, a Big 12 team against a Mountain West team or something like that. And if I didn't know the actual outcome, watching the first drive, you'd be like, well, shit, this is not even competitive. Why should I watch this game? And then it all flips, and then everybody's terrible for a half.
Wow. Yeah. I'm kind of glad I didn't. I'm not really looking forward to watching the game tonight either, honestly, if we're going to.
Oh, gosh, no.
Bring that up.
Hey, is my sound okay? Do you want me to use the, I don't have like my best mic with
No,
me.
you're good. You sound
I
good.
left it in the office. Okay, cool.
No, it sounds good. So we're good to go. And anyway, I explained to you, I like to keep it about an hour or so because I feel like I always lose interest after that. So why not everybody else, right? I got to go with what I know, and that's what I know.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so to get started, I know this is a question that everybody asks you, and I don't really care because I'm still going to ask you anyway. My question is, how did you get started, not in the fantasy industry, but just playing fantasy football? I know you play other sports as well. Not that, So.
Oh, shoot. That's a fun question. I think the first league that I played in, we had, it's college buddies, right? It's like a dorm floor situation. And we had heard of the existence of fantasy football, but none of us understood it. We were just like, okay, cool. This is kind of a Dungeons and Dragons-y game that we can all play together, and whatever, we'll drink while we have this draft. But we didn't have the concept down at all. So we thought, I don't know why we thought, this is like, I'm in college, it's Iowa City, it's 1990, 1991, something like that. And we're like, we probably have to draft full team rosters. So we drafted like offensive linemen. We drafted everything. We drafted punters. We drafted it all. And then I think we invented a scoring system after the draft. And obviously a draft like that lasts like 4 hours, right? And it was terrible. We didn't have good research tools, anything like that. So I don't even remember what the scoring system was that we invented for offensive linemen. But it was hell. Like it was a brutal league, and I think I may have done well in that because nobody else stuck it out. Nobody else that's also the days of like your hand scoring it, right? It's all pen and paper. The entire league probably still exists in a spiral notebook somewhere. But I think I did well in that because nobody else was gonna grind the way I would in a situation where you have like 22 person rosters or whatever it was. And then the first like legitimate fantasy league I played was it would have been it was like the corporate job that I had out of school, right? Like for a while, I don't know, 7-8 years, I worked had a very corporate life. Paying off student loans, whatnot. And I had a very corporate fantasy league. And that is actually what got me into fantasy sports more than anything. Like, it was a fun group of guys. It was only like a 10-man league. And I drafted great teams, like
Mhm.
legitimately great. Like, so this is like 94, 95, something like that. I think the first team I drafted was like Emmett Smith, Herman Moore, Elway, maybe Warren Moon. It was great.
Yeah.
I nailed, I don't know, the first 6, 7 rounds. It was an incredible team. Emmett, mid 90s, was a cheat code unlike anyone other than maybe Jerry Rice, right? Like
Mhm.
it was a great team.
Yes.
Um, and for the first 3, 4, man, I think at least 4 years of that league, like some ridiculous number of seasons, I was great all regular season. I would make the fantasy championship, and I always lost. And I would lose in the most improbable ways. Like I think that first year, I went in to the Monday night game in week 16 with like a 50-point lead, and I was talking so much shit. And it's like a workplace league, so I'm talking shit to people who are like 2 rungs above me on the corporate hierarchy, right? Like I'm
That's
really
awesome.
like I'm feeling myself. And then the Monday night game, whichever year this was, it was the Niners and I think it was the Vikings, the Niners and the Vikings. And I played a team that had like you could go look up the box score. I played a team that had Jerry Rice and Steve Young, and I forget who the Viking was. But in that game, Steve Young had one of like the top 10 all time quarterbacking performances. Like I don't know, 6 touchdowns, something like that. Tons of rushing yards, 300 plus passing. Jerry Rice caught basically all of the touchdowns. I think Jerry Rice like sniffed 300 yards in that game. He had 200 some
Wow.
yards. He had like 3 or 4 touchdowns, and so I ended up losing by a lot. And like loss after loss like that piled up in fantasy championships, and it made me like I probably wouldn't have been if I just won that first year, that first title. I would have been like, oh, I'm great at this. I don't need to dive into this. Like I've got it mastered. Nobody's as good at this as I am. But instead I was totally snake bit for several years, and I became just absolutely obsessive about it.
You're talking about going in and actually having to do everything by hand, and then you've got people that are complaining when your app goes down for 5 minutes. It's
Oh, listen,
like
the job of a fantasy commissioner was like a job, was like a real job for which you should have been compensated. Like every week you were distributing like, 8 pages of you'd have to steal some time on the company copier. You'd have to like, sneak maybe you'd have to take a lunch break in which you would actually like spend the entire time writing up the summary of events for the week. It was hard. Like it was a
yeah,
legitimate
it sounds
job,
like it.
and it was pretty thankless. And
Mhm.
to this day, I still like tip my fantasy commissioners if I win a league, but
Oh yeah,
they don't have to do shit now. Like you don't have to do anything.
yeah,
You're not
really.
producing publications each week. You're
I
not,
mean, I complain about it, but yeah,
yeah, it's not what it used to
it's
be.
not like it's my biggest thing is just like getting people to participate, that they've got all the resources in front of them. I don't have to come over and like listen. So it's cool
For
to hear
sure.
you. Because yeah, I had Bob Lung on and he was telling me the same stuff, and I was like, man, I don't know if I envy you guys. Probably not.
It was so hard.
So
It was so hard, but it was fun. Like
yeah, right.
that was some of the first professional, semi-professional sports writing I feel like I did. It was great.
I I just can't even imagine. I don't know. I'm just like thinking about it right now and just thinking about how easy, even though this has been a COVID year, how easy it's been to be a commissioner, even though, things are a little different. It's still super easy. So you were talking about being in a league with your corporate the people that you worked with when you had your corporate job. Um and you were there for quite some time. What made you take the leap from being in a corporate job to doing writing, or were you doing writing on the side?
That's a good question. I was always, as an English major in school, always thought of myself as a writer. I suppose I did not like my corporate job was like I was a warehouse manager, and then I was a accounts receivable guy, and I was a marketing manager, and it was a really nice company. Had a good experience there, learned a bunch of good habits there, and all that. But it was a very corporate job. And I was not writing, but I was doing like a little dabbling on the side, right? Like doing my own thing. And then, you know, I'm super old. I'm older than the internet, right? And the internet was just because like sports writing for the internet was just becoming a thing at a certain point. I think like Yahoo didn't have fantasy available to you until like
Hmm.
1999, and this is years before Deadspin. And so I decide that outside of work, I need a release. I need to be doing something. I need to sort of scratch the itch of sports writing or any sort of writing. And, I found a couple of online magazines that I could write for, one of which was actually operated by Chris Harris, who
Okay.
people now know from either ESPN or Harris Football. Great podcast. And he's become like a really good friend of mine. So I started writing for Chris in this like online sort of pop culture little magazine that he put together. This is maybe the late 90s, 2000s, something like that. I was doing that for a little while, and then my daughter was born. I have a 19-year-old daughter, and when she was born, and when we knew we were going to have her, it was like kind of life decision time, right? And my wife absolutely loved her work, great at it, loved her job, and I was, I loved my company, but I didn't have the same level of attachment to the work that I was doing that she did. So. And we're, very super fortunate. But at that point, I'm sure I'd paid off student loans and stuff like that. So I was able to leave that job and just like dive into freelance writing. And I sort of dove into every web opportunity that I had. And lucky enough to be in a city like Chicago, where there were at the time a bunch of freelance like publications that I could write for on a freelance basis, where I didn't have to know anybody, right? I could just pitch them. If it was a good idea, I would like find the story, write the story, submit it. And I ended up having good relationships with New City Chicago and the Chicago Reader, the Chicago Sports Review. Like there's just a bunch of alternative publications out there that provided a platform. So I did that for a little while as well. And then like a couple of those editors, I think it was New City Chicago, got bought by ESPN somehow, miraculously. I don't remember how that went down. But all of a sudden, like these two editors that I was writing for a while migrated to ESPN. So now I had an in at ESPN.com, and I was writing there for a little bit too.
So when you got the opportunity to write for ESPN, how did you feel going from, I was working a corporate job doing this, doing that, and now I get to, write for a big publication and do work there?
I will say I didn't, maybe like I don't know, I was probably pretty cocky about it. Like again, I'd always thought of myself as a writer. I felt like I belonged there. I didn't feel like I was, over my head or anything like that. And I'd already done some really solid work, I thought, locally. Also, I will say the experience of writing for particularly it's this local alternative publication called the Chicago Reader. I had never experienced that sort of rigorous editorial process, right? Like I would, I like reported stories there. I would go out and I would find stories and I would report them, and then I would write the piece and I would file it. And, it was a couple of rounds of editing and a couple of rounds of fact checking. And there were multiple levels of people providing feedback. And, I had to be able to roll with it and allow a whole lot of changes to, like, I don't know, a lot of write. Like, I feel like that's one advantage I've always had as a writer, is that I am open to being edited and I am comfortable with being edited. But it was a super rigorous process. And then I got to ESPN and I would file stuff that would get posted live like within minutes. And that was the first experience I had with that. Like, the Reader was a print publication. And so like, old school print publications have their process, and it might be 2 weeks from the time that you file a story to the time that it actually ran. And ESPN was like, cool, we'll get this up and it's going to be the lead story for a couple hours and we'll get around to editing it later. And that was like, I'd never experienced anything like that.
Wow. Can't even, imagine going from one to the other. That's got to be kind of mind blowing.
That's actually not, that comes across as like an ESPN diss. It's not even that. That was like everybody's process. Like that's my process now. I just post stuff myself now.
Oh yeah. I mean, I do the same thing with when I'm with Fighting Chance Fantasy. I just post it and then, go from there. But yeah, it is weird to see, or I don't want to say weird. It is cool to see how, different places do different things and how technology helped improve, getting things out to people quicker. So you were a stay-at-home dad and you were doing, you were writing and doing all that. Do you think that you would have gotten into sports writing and writing more sports-related articles if you had stayed at your job and not been a stay-at-home dad? Or do you think that I know it's hard to think of a path that you'd be at now, but what do you feel?
It's a good question. And I was going to have, I was in a good situation. So like, but that was like a pivot point for me. I'm sure.
Hmm.
I'm fairly sure that if I had not left, and I don't have like any bad memories. Like it was a wonderful company actually, and
Right.
I learned a ton of really good habits there. But I feel like if I hadn't left it then, when I had a small child, I probably would
Hmm.
not have left, and I don't know, I would be like I'd probably still be a marketing manager there. I don't know what I would be. I would be, you know, a manager of the call center or something. I don't know. I would have like some corporate gig there. I would probably still be there. I loved all the people.
Hmm.
Um, but you know, you know, it's one of those things where you're like, well, if I'm ever gonna, it just feels like such a monumental event when
Right.
when you bring a child into the world. So you're
Hmm.
like, this is already like a life changing event. Let's just throw some other stuff on top of it. And if I'm ever gonna do this thing, now is a good point to do it. And yeah, it worked out. It totally worked out.
That's
I timed it well too. Like I'm super lucky about that. Like it was just like sports writing on the internet was making so many things possible that would not have been
yeah.
possible like 5 years before, and not everybody had stumbled into it yet. So I was just lucky timing wise.
That yeah, the internet just like changed everything, and then you were able to do the stuff from home. Do you think that the being able to work from home and have that kind of time to do it, it made it easier for you in the fantasy football, not just fantasy football, but in sports writing in general? Did it feel like that was something that kind of alleviated a lot of stress, was being able to do it at home?
When you have a small child and a lot, you know, like people will know this, like you're so governed by their nap schedule, right? Like I couldn't, you know, I still had to be when she was awake. I had to be, I had to be a dad. So
Yep.
I had to cram a lot of work into 2 naps a day, and
Yep.
then you know I had to try to like trying to wake up before your kid when your kid
Oh
is an
man.
infant is really hard. So I would try to do stuff early in the morning and late at night and during naps and stuff like that. So it was not particularly advantageous, which is why I did well like writing features that weren't particularly time sensitive. I could not have been a reporter. I could not have like, oh, hey, there's a live event that we need you to go cover. I would have been like, no, I can't. I can't do any of that. But I could do some slow meandering stories that took 2-3 weeks to put together and research at my leisure. I could do that.
Well, yeah, I don't have any kids, so I don't know how that is. But I work 8 to 5, so I get off of work and then I like come home and either have a night, where I can relax. But most of the time, it's like, oh well, you got to try to fit everything in before you go to bed. You said your daughter's 19 now?
Yeah, yeah.
Did she have to come? Like, I'm assuming that the COVID stuff, you had another child back in your house again. Is that what happened?
Oh shoot, yeah. That was crazy. She's an athlete too. She's a
Okay.
runner. She's a runner at WashU in St. Louis, and like one week we had been at a meet at the Armory in New York to watch her in like a conference meet, and then 2 weeks later, that they'd they'd ejected them all from campus, and she was living at home again, and trying to conduct online classes in an environment where my wife is suddenly home, and my wife is, she's got conference calls all day, so she's wandering around the house on calls, and I'm trying to record podcasts and video from home, and we're just all in a tight spot we're all trying to be here in this seat in this office, trying to record things and do what we've got to do at different times. So that it was hard. It was really hard. She's back. She's living off campus now, but she's back in St. Louis right now. But it's still virtual learning, and it's still weird.
I was just in St. Louis actually. Last month, I was in St. Louis for a little bit. I liked it. It was good. Okay, so I didn't know this about you until recently, and I know this is not a little known fact. People know about it, but you also have written young adult novels as well. Is that correct?
That is correct. I didn't know if that was going to come up. Yeah, like so that's part of the weirdness of me getting into fantasy at all is that I viewed myself very much as just strictly a writer. And over time, over time, it turned out that if you were going to work in fantasy, you had to, you had to do radio, and you had to do pods, and you had to sure as shit do video. But I didn't start out like that at all. I was like, I'm going to do 4 columns a week for Yahoo. That's going to be what I do fantasy wise. And nobody's ever going to have to see my face. But when I was writing for ESPN, like I was at a stage where I didn't say no to anything. Right. And, anybody who came to me with a pitch, like I was still going to people with pitches. So anybody who came to me and asked me to do something or consider doing something, I was like, hard yes, I will absolutely do that. So I'm doing, a little bit of freelancing over here for the Reader, and I'm doing a little bit of freelancing over here for ESPN. And somebody had emailed me out of the blue, and I had no notion of how books were written for kids and young adults, right? But it turns out that the way most of it is done is through, or at least a lot of it is done, is through operators called book packagers, which will come up with like, a very short synopsis, a nugget of an idea of a plot, and then they will go find a writer who they think will do it for cheap and can do it effectively. And so I got one of these pitch emails. They were like, hey, here's this rough idea about a kid who drives across the country to meet a girl who he has discovered on the internet. Again, this is like a million years ago when the internet is kind of new, and the idea of meeting someone on the internet is mind blowing, right? So they were like, hey, would you like to write a couple of chapters of this on spec? We think you have a good voice for, young women. And I was like, at the time, I'm pretty much just writing for 50-year-old men, right? Like that's who's reading Page 2 on ESPN. But I was like, sure, I'll do that. And so that turned into a YA novel that was called All the Way, that then became the movie Sex Drive, which airs occasionally at like 2 or 3 a.m. on Comedy Central, I think. And I get hit up by like about every month or so, I'll get a tweet from somebody at like 4 a.m, mm-hmm. and they're like, holy crap, I watched Sex Drive until the very last credit, and there was a picture of you. I can't believe you did that. So I get that periodically, but not. Like, I feel like not too many people know that I had that little diversion during my career.
All these people that are like drunk at 4 a.m. and they're like really confused when they see you on the TV. They're like, was it a little too strong tonight? I don't know, but yeah, that's funny.
They're like, man, that's that asshole that told me to draft Zeke.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, sorry, that's too close to home.
No, I don't like him. Oops, sorry. I don't like him. Anyway, so you transitioned to being a part of Yahoo. How did that opportunity arise?
Yeah, that was so. Yeah, I've been writing for ESPN, and I had done occasional fantasy basketball stuff for ESPN just because. Mm-hmm. I don't even remember how that happened, to be totally honest. I was doing a bunch of stuff for a short-lived section of the site called Page 3, and a more well-known section of the site called Page 2, and somehow I stumbled into writing fantasy basketball as well. Like I'd been doing some writing for Talented Mr. Roto before, as almost everybody of like my generation in fantasy did. We're all part of the Matt Berry coaching tree. In mm-hmm. some way, right? So I'd been doing some stuff for Talented Mr. Roto, which I think I was connected to that through Harris, but I don't remember. But I'd been doing some fantasy basketball stuff for Yahoo, and Brandon Funston reached out to me when the FSTA convention was like the winter convention. I forget, probably summer actually, was in Chicago, and he reached out and he was like, "Hey, we're hiring for a position at Yahoo. I've seen your stuff. Why don't we meet for dinner?" And so I met Funston and I met Brad Evans for the first time. This would be, would this be like 2006, something like that? I think I started at Yahoo with baseball season in 2007. So maybe it was actually, maybe, I don't know. It's like 2006, 2007. I meet those two, and Brad is shit-faced. Brad is absolutely shit-faced. And it's like a dinner interview, and we go to Gino's East. Like Funston wants deep dish in Chicago, and Brad has been. I think that night Brad had been drafting a team at the FSTA conference. One of those they used to put them all on stage, and there'd be this mass draft of all these fantasy personalities. And the way Funston was telling it at the time, Brad was just yelling out picks and he was cursing, and maybe the whole thing was supposed to be on radio, and everybody was upset at Brad. And but whatever, Brad is his own
that's
guy.
Brad.
That is entirely Brad. And we just we had a really fun dinner. Like it felt like it. I don't know. It felt like hanging out with childhood friends that you had not seen in a long time, more than like a business meeting where I'm actually interviewing for something. So I don't know. We just talked sports for 90 minutes or so and ate pizza, and it was a good time. And I feel like I was either hired that night or shortly thereafter. Like we connected in such a way that you could tell that like we could get on video projects together and we could collaborate together, and it was going to be good.
That's awesome. I like that story. Brad, I met him one time and I was shit-faced. He wasn't shit-faced. So, it was, I met him and Liz Lozo on the same day, and I was like shit-faced. Sorry guys, but it happens. Yeah, but that's just that's a funny Brad story, and it's really cool to hear how that whole, you felt like you guys were connected, you guys had known each other for a while, because you can really tell that when you guys interact, whether you guys are potting together, or I see you guys on video together or whatever. It's really cool to see. So when you transitioned to Yahoo, and then you took, you started working there, how were your nerves? How was your excitement level? What were the feelings like right when you started working with him?
It's funny because it immediately became apparent that I would have to do more than just write, which is not home base for me at all. Right.
Yeah.
Like I felt really comfortable writing. I felt like I had a pretty unique voice at the time within fantasy. I feel like I was trying to approach football and baseball in a way that not a lot of people were. I felt like just the fact of having a background in journalism mattered. The fact of that I felt almost like uniquely able to do the writing side of that job. Really enjoyed it, and was totally petrified of having to do professional video for the first time in my life, which I had never even considered. And now, like, it's a ridiculous thing to say now, and it kind of dates me, because at this point, it's just understood that if you're getting into fantasy, you're probably coming at it through video or podcasting. Like that's what you want to do, and any writing that you might have to do is kind of incidental, right? But I was coming at it very much as a journalist, and these were sort of the days when people were figuring out that we've got to have video to accompany these stories, and advertisers are interested in video. So by God, we've got to produce like 90-second or 3-minute videos. And I was just terrible at it. I'm fine now. I would give myself like a B+. I'm not Matt Harmon good. I'm certainly not Brad Evans good. Like Brad was always a radio video guy, and he's great at it. Like Harmon's so good on video. Liz is so good on video. And I'm fine. But I never. It was really hard initially. Like it was really hard because I was of the mindset where I was like, oh man, if I'm on video, I gotta show everything I know. I gotta throw everything out there. I've got 19 things that I want to say. I've got all these bullet points written down. I've got it like all in here, and I've got to spit it out as quickly as possible. And it turns out you don't want to do that at all. Like you want to, it just takes time to figure out that you need to maybe make your 2 or 3 best points, try to make them quickly. You don't have to throw like reams of supporting data at everything. Like it doesn't work on video, and it took me a long time to figure that out. So I feel like if I were to go back and watch any of those terrible like pickup clips that we would do in the first couple of years, like 07, 08, I'm sure they're awful. They dressed us in suits, right? Like I had to wear a tie. I had to wear
oh no.
Yeah, it was really
not comfortable for sure.
much more professional than fantasy should ever have to be. So we were in kind of unnatural attire, and I was just trying to cram a million things into a really short video. And I feel like I'm more comfortable. I'm certainly more comfortable on camera now. Not like maybe I get a little bit better all the time. I don't know. I'm probably about as good as I ever want to be on camera. But it was hard for the first couple of years. That was not easy.
Yeah, I mean, being in front of the camera is kind of nerve-wracking, and especially if you're going into it and you've never done it before. Of
Yeah,
course.
I did not have an issue. Like at ESPN, it was like I don't know, I didn't get anxious or wowed by the fact that like I could write something that would get front page play and it would get millions of clicks. I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
Connecting with all those people was super interesting. But my God, those first couple of years at Yahoo, if I was going to record a video that might get watched by a couple thousand people who were looking for some middle infield pickups during their baseball season, like that got me. I was not comfortable with it. I was not comfortable with the format. I had never trained to do it, and you just had to figure it out along the way.
And a lot of it is like entertainment too. So you have to make sure that you're holding your audience's attention. Um, and you had to do a lot of other stuff. Like you said, you were just writing, but you have to do all kinds of stuff. Now, how is putting together, let's say, like putting together rankings? Like, how was that for you? If they were like, okay, you need to do this, and you had never done it before, so how was that for you?
Shout out to Fantasy Pros that has actually made it like super easy, super quick, really democratic. Like it's so much simpler now than it was. Like when I started at Yahoo, I knew okay, rankings are going to be a big part of the job. This is the essence of what we do. I feel like we weren't even publishing rankings until like Thursday or Friday. Now, of course, you want to be first to market with stuff like that. So I've got to get my ranks done like Monday night while games are still happening. I mean, in 2020, there can be games happening on Tuesday, Wednesday. Like, the slate is not even finished yet, and you're ranking for the following week. But when we first started doing it, Brandon would send out this horrible Excel spreadsheet on which we were supposed to cut and paste a whole bunch of names that he probably wouldn't change. He didn't do anything to maintain it. He wasn't curating it. He didn't take out anybody who was on a bye. He didn't take out anybody who was injured, right? Like he just gave us the same damn spreadsheet each week and we had to rearrange it. And I don't know what he was doing with it when we sent it back to him. But it was clumsy and took hours and I hated it.
Yeah.
And now again, thanks to the miracle that is the rankings tool on Fantasy Pros, I know there's other people that have issues with Fantasy Pros, but they have made my life so much simpler.
Easier.
It's so good now. It's so good.
That's I've never used it, but I mean I've used Fantasy Pros obviously, but I've never used the actual tool. But I know someone who writes for the same site as me, and I've always been kind of concerned to do it because I'm like, like I'm not really good at ranking people, but I get where if it makes it easier and it makes it more simple, I will.
The whole like the rankings game is kind of a racket on its own, right? Because you can use them to express different things, and I used to have this conversation with Brad all the time. Like you could look at Brad's ranks and they kind of told a story about how he felt about specific players, right? Like when and it's one of his best he's a super successful fantasy analyst. He's wonderful on camera, all that. Like, by God, if Brad had a feeling about a guy one way or another, he didn't hedge in the ranks, right? Like if he didn't think Adrian Peterson, even vintage Adrian Peterson, was gonna have a good week, then by God, Adrian Peterson would be like running back 44. Brad wouldn't have him at like 10 or something like that. Brad would take a strong stand, but like you could read his ranks and it would tell you a story about how he thought the week played out. And like that's obviously a terrible approach if you're trying to win an accuracy contest or something like that. Like I feel like we've made it something where I like the people who win accuracy contests are doing wonderful work. And like there have been years when I've done well, there have been years when I haven't done well. I don't look at it until the end of the season, but like I feel like I'm actually doing my most useful work when even if I'm wrong, like when I take a really strong stand on a player and I rank him sort of outrageously high or outrageously low, at least I'm communicating a pretty strong feeling. And that's what you ought to do. But that's terrible if you get caught up in the idea of, oh, how are my ranks going to compare to like industry consensus or ECR, or how is this going to grade out in the end? But I don't know. I know I've had this conversation with Harmon too, and he hates it because you can't really tier your ranks. You can't say that, and it's a problem, right? Like
Yeah.
I may think at wide receiver in a given week that there's like 15 guys that I spend a lot of time on, and I there's some fine details that need to be sorted out. But then there's this whole group between like 16 and 36. They're basically the same tier for me, and any of them could pop. Like
Yeah.
one of them is
Yep.
going to lose 40 yards on a PI flag, and those are gone forever. And so he doesn't perform as well as you thought he would. And one of them is going to get a touchdown negated, right? Like there's
Yep.
shit's
That's
going to happen.
exactly it.
But they're like,
Mhm.
the same population of players, and like, uh,
Yeah.
But tiering would make it a whole lot better. And there's
Yeah.
just a lot of ways to express the way you feel about players, other than a simple 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all the way down to 60.
And I like tiering. Yeah, exactly. Like, I think that's another thing that's kind of pulled me away from wanting to even try to do rankings, is because I always clump certain guys together, and I'm like, they're gonna be like, when people ask me for advice, I'm like, I think they're pretty much the same if you ask me for it, so that, and I also remember with Fantasy Pros back in the day, they used to do a thing where if you were just this, somebody like me who was just chilling at home, not an analyst or anything back in the day, you could fill out something, and then it would tell you at the end, like, you put your rankings in, then it'll compare you to every other ranker, blah, 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 blah. And then you would win like freaking daily fantasy, like, here's a $5, whatever.
Yeah.
So, I
I
remember
should say I like
that.
that they do it.
Yeah.
I like that they've sort of democratized it in a like I love their tool.
Right.
Love participating in the process. I think it's great. My ranks are out there for free anyway. I don't care if I publish them through Fantasy Pros and they get pulled together with everybody else. Like I think it's great. I think it's great that like
Right.
I can be on a platform, Brad can be on a platform, Harmon, Liz, everybody, and like if you're writing somewhere else, you can see how you performed against the rest of us. I think it's awesome. I think it's totally fine. I don't mean to complain about it. I'm just
No.
saying there's so much that I want to express about players when we rank that just
Yeah.
you can't,
Yeah.
you
Well,
if
that's
you
why they
take
got
a
to go
really
check your stuff out.
yeah, if you take a really strong stand, it doesn't serve you well.
Well, yeah, and you'll notice that too if you go in and look, and there's like somebody had ranked somebody really low, and somebody had, and the average is way up here, and you're like, wow, I got to go find out where that person, where their information is, where their articles are, where their
Yeah,
videos
yeah,
are
yeah.
talking about it. So yeah, that's a good way to bring the casual fan in as well, because I know that that's one of the sites that people who are just playing for fun, they're not like over here like crunching numbers and being nerds like we are. um Fantasy Pros and the ranking system is something I know that my wife, she'll be like, oh yeah, well, Fantasy Pros says this. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. um you guys on with Yahoo, you guys do Yahoo Fantasy Live. How is that? How is it when you guys are all together doing that? And because it's a weekly thing, and it's so cool to watch. So for us that are just watching, how is that whole situation?
This season has been an absolute miracle of production. It is incredible and it's like no credit to what like Liz, Matt, Tank. They're all wonderful. It's no
Hmm.
credit to us because all like for every prior year of the show,
Hmm.
either myself or in the past, Brad, Brandon, whoever, we're flying out to the corporate HQ in Sunnyvale, California, right? We're doing like a
Hmm.
pretty standard studio show. Super fun.
Hmm.
We'd all be together in the same room, big production crew and all that. It was a fun little after party after every show. Like I absolutely loved it. But they have managed to recreate it in a sort of virtual environment this
Hmm.
season. It has been pretty seamless. And I mean, our production staff, the whole crew, like they're at
Hmm.
their homes. It's not,
Yeah.
they're not collaborating in the same way that they were before. It's been an absolute miracle of production. And again, it has very little to do with me. I'm fundamentally still doing the same things, except I'm not taking a couple of 4-hour flights each week, right? I'm just like
Yeah.
sitting in the office in Chicago, yapping when they tell me to yap, and it's been not that much different for me, except less travel. But the production is just absolutely incredible this year. I'm floored by it.
Yeah, I mean, I've watched it, and it's just, yeah, you guys all, there's no hiccups. You guys are all smooth sailing. You guys got it down, and the production crew and everybody, that is just amazing what they could do with all of that.
Because we're all separate. Like, Matt's at his home, Liz is at her home, Tank is a couple 100 miles away in Northern California. I'm in Chicago. Like, none of us are together in the same spot. The crew is not in the same spot. They're talking to you periodically in an IFB throughout the show, but every show feels, from a production standpoint, like they're just trying to crash land a plane in an organized manner, right? And they always do. They always land it. It's been an incredible thing to watch all season. I can't believe we're at the end of this year. Actually, it's been incredible.
It's really cool how you guys were able to do that. And I know a new segment you guys have this year is the community spotlight segment, where you guys have, up and coming fantasy analysts, writers, podcasters, whatever, come on and talk with you. And you go over a little bit here, a little bit there. How did that idea come about? And what do you think the importance of showcasing the smaller guys and gals has?
There's a ton, you know this, obviously, there's a ton of people doing a lot of good work out there. And there's only so many, major media jobs in fantasy, right? Like, there's, I don't know, a handful of guys at ESPN, handful of guys at CBS, handful at NFL, and a handful at Yahoo. And now we're like, and that's where, like, that's where you get a lot of exposure. That's sort of the mainstream side of it. But there's so many people doing so much good work, and our editorial director, Jason Klobaka, I know this has been an important project for him for a couple of years, just trying to find a way to lend that platform to the many other people who are doing really good work in the fantasy space. That, like, we're a pretty lean crew at Yahoo. There's only 4 or 5 of us. There's not very many, and once you get into the grind of a typical fantasy football season, you just got some really basic stuff that you got to knock out each week. You've got to talk about pickups. You got to talk about the waiver wire. You got to talk about, you got ranks on a certain day. You've got this on a certain day, right? Like, there's just a standard flow to it. And we're able to bring different perspectives in. We're able to bring, we may not have time to sit down and do like a think piece about fantasy football, but there's other people out there doing great research, and we're trying to find them, trying to bring them in. It also, like, I feel like it's a pretty good practice rep for a lot of the folks that we're bringing in too, right? We're giving some people a bigger stage, a different stage, on which to sort of walk through some of the research that they've done, some of the work that they've done. And it's probably at some level, it's a little bit of an audition for Yahoo too, right? Like, Jason's watching these things and, wants to know, okay, who's great on camera, and hopefully it's just good experience for all the people that we're bringing into the show.
I got to do it. It was fun.
You're great. Like, you're great. And it's been one of my favorite things to watch all these segments on the show throughout the season too.
I'll go and like rewatch. Like, I know you had Troy on, and I'm going to have him on this show at one point. And
Troy was so fun. And we accidentally caught Troy in the week that Tua was taking over the
he's a big Dolphins fan.
Yeah, and we caught him like in the week that Tua was taking over, and that was scheduled like, I don't know, 2-3 weeks before, and it was just purely accidental. But it was just a magical week to catch him. He was great.
That was awesome. Yeah, he's great, and I think he does a great job podcasting. And he's one of those like newer guys and gals, one of the newer crew that's coming up. We're all like, the 20, 15, 20, whatever, that little range. Because I've only been trying to write and do all that stuff for a few years. Do you think that Twitter is like a really good tool right now for getting noticed in the fantasy football industry, especially if you're like brand new to it?
Yeah, there's no question about it, right? Like, I have so many friends in the fantasy industry now, and I'm sure everybody would say this, that I've not met personally, that I've interacted with.
For
5 years, 7 years on Twitter, and some of them are just people who started out just like asking questions. Like, Twitter can obviously be, all social platforms, not just Twitter, can be just absolute hell sites, if you let them become that, right? But I I love a lot of the one-on-one interactions that I've had on Twitter over the years, and I don't know that every fantasy analyst uses it that way. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
probably only, I don't know, I might tweet like once a day. I feel like my like actual tweets to the world are pretty infrequent, but I am replying to people constantly, and I like that sense of community on the platform. And so yeah, I'm confident that I met you on Twitter. I know
Yep.
that I met Troy on
Yep.
Twitter. But I don't know, there's 100 people that are in the industry that I first
Mm-hmm.
met on Twitter. And I think it's far and away the best networking tool in fantasy right now, because if you can be, clever, engaging, polite, inoffensive and yet memorable on social platforms, like, it'll just go a long way. It'll go a long way, and it leads to a lot of opportunities.
So would you say Twitter is the new sitting around the table having a drink?
For sure, for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, it's like all you've got in 2020, right? Like,
Right.
you and I are here on video, and I'm having a drink as we
Right.
speak. So
I
sure,
mean,
yeah.
yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think that Twitter has been really influential. I mean, I wouldn't be writing anywhere if it wasn't for Twitter, and I know that there's a ton of people that wouldn't be doing anything that they do right now if it wasn't for Twitter. I wouldn't know who any of you people are.
I mean, you should have seen the media landscape in like 1990. Like, you
Yeah.
had to work for a print publication, and you had to grind, and you had to start at the news desk, and you had to move
Mhm.
to this and move to that, and it was going to be 35 years, if you were lucky, before you got to write a sports column, right? Like, and that's just
Yeah.
how it was. And it didn't even have that much to do with merit.
Mhm.
In fact, that's the reason, to sort of circle back to something we were talking about earlier. I'm confident that the reason that I got into sports writing is that the back page sports columnists, locally in
Mhm.
Chicago, were terrible. I mean,
Yeah.
I was getting fed Jay Mariotti like every day by the Sun Times, and he was a train wreck of a writer, like, outrageously unfunny. Um,
Mhm.
and he's, I don't know him personally, but he seems like a pretty shitty human being too. But like, that's what I was being
Yeah.
given. And I was like, well,
Right.
shoot, the internet's here now. I can do this, except better. And why wouldn't that work? And it kind of did. And it just democratized an awful lot of things. And like, if you'd really experienced, print media in the early 90s, the 80s, or anything like that, it's just so different. And there's so many opportunities that are available today, and so many platforms to bring people together that just simply had not existed, like, in human history until right now.
There are a ton of resources, and I like the fact that it's an easy way to, like you were talking about, communicating with people and being able to respond and stuff. I mean, yeah, I wouldn't have you on the show if it wasn't for that, Twitter, being able to like actually talk to
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
And it's really cool when you guys have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands, you're like triple digit, like you guys are like triple what us, just starting out or at. And it's just really cool to I know I'm not trying to, like, push your ego and make you feel like, but it's really cool. It's really freaking cool when people like you, or like, you know Liz and Matt and Scott, you guys have all, like, over with Yahoo, you guys have all like reached out to me at one point or another, either just to
yeah.
check on me if I'm like, you could tell that I'm having a shit day, or just to be like, I appreciate you, like, being a positive force in the community. So it's really cool.
No, it's nice of you to say. You put more of yourself out on Twitter than I ever do. So you're bold in that way.
I'm something. I don't know if bold's the word I'd use. Kind of just yeah, I'm a mess. How about that? So I didn't want to forget this, so I'm gonna bring it up now, even though I don't really have a segue into it. But I can't even say it right. FSWA. There we go. Not that I have been drinking, but maybe I have. Um, what is you're you are the president, the guy right now. That's like, you know, bringing that, to everybody's faces. How did you become the president of that? And what is it? And tell people what it is too, because
Yeah,
I can't speak. So
the Fantasy Sports Writers Association basically exists to recognize all of the good work that goes on in the fantasy space.
right.
And at the time that it sprang up, which again is early 2000s. But that was a time when fantasy sports were really like a niche and popularly viewed as sort of a geeky outgrowth of sports generally, right? It was I would say that fantasy writers didn't get certainly the recognition. They didn't get the space on national platforms that they have now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
right.
if you wrote fantasy for ESPN, you were very separate from the rest of ESPN. Like they weren't weaving fantasy into the Monday night broadcast. They weren't weaving fantasy into any of their standard content. You never heard game broadcasters mention the fantasy impact of a play. It just absolutely didn't happen. It was super niche. And in time, thanks in part to the early efforts, I think, of the Fantasy Sports Writers Association, and obviously in part because media companies realized that it could make them a lot of money. Like it became much more mainstream. More
mm-hmm.
people played it, and everybody kind of developed the idea that, oh, this is going to make me a smarter sports fan. This is going to make me a better sports fan. People didn't get that at first. And so the Fantasy Sports Writers Association sprang up as a way to just recognize it. Like, we Matt Berry, like Matt Berry's pretty good. Like, we got to find a way to recognize him. Chris Harris, pretty good. We got to find a way to recognize him. Bob Harris, like, we had a lot of good voices in the
mm-hmm.
fantasy space that were not being recognized, as traditional sports writers. And so we filled a pretty natural void there. And I think the FSWA has done a pretty good job, but like we only exist to recognize the good work that writers and content
mm-hmm.
producers are creating. Like we're in peak award season now. So I'm really starting to like field the questions from people who are nominating for awards, people who are submitting, podcasts and video and all that jazz. And so it gets hectic for a couple months out of the year. And we're in it now. Like I'm seeing all stuff like that. But for years, we've been fortunate enough to have the three academics who do great work judging all the submissions. And I feel like we've adapted to a changing industry a little bit. Like
mm-hmm.
when it launched, there were like 6 awards. I don't know, and they were sport specific awards, and they were strictly for writing, right? And now I think we've done a pretty good job of recognizing DFS as its own voice and the emergence of podcasting and all the video and radio stuff that's done now. So now we've expanded to over 20 awards. We get hundreds of submissions in the biggest categories. So it's a chore. Like our judges have a real chore on their hands. And so, we do what we can to advocate for fantasy writers all over the place. I feel like I should also say that we are an association that is for like the individual writers. This is not a corporate association. Like we're not collecting, like you pay us like $39 one time in your whole life and you're a member of the organization. We're not like taking big checks from corporations to like re-up every year. We like the awards are specific to individuals. They aren't like, hey, ESPN won the award or the footballers won the award or whatever. Like these we specifically recognize our individual members.
That's super dope. Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of people on Twitter lately that are tweeting out to you and tweeting out, just saying that now that you accepted them in or whatever.
Oh
It's
man,
just like
that's super satisfying. Like I love that. It
mm-hmm.
messes with your mentions a little bit, but I love it. I love seeing people excited to be just like it's a simple step, but I love seeing people being recognized as kind of made members of the community.
Yes, it's it's in all of our bios and everything on Twitter. We're like, yeah, it's a badge of honor. So it is really cool to be able to and to be able to go and look and see, who.
Well, I mean, to be a member, you have to do it for a year. You have to actually do the work for like I can't tell you how often I hear from people who are like, oh man, I could do your job, and a lot of them could. Like a lot of people could do my job. I get it. I am not the only sports fan who loves to sit around and talk about football and all that, but like the actual day-to-day of it is like I feel like a lot of people could do it for a day and they've got a
Yeah.
great article in them and they've got a great idea in them, but like there's a grind to it. And again,
Hmm.
we're just bullshitting about sports the whole time. So it's not that much of a grind. Like I've worked real jobs and I know there's a difference between what I'm doing now and real jobs, but like there's a grind to producing, quality, readable, amusing content throughout a full year and a full season, and still like checking all the boxes that you have to during a normal fantasy week. So it's like it's hard, and to become a member, you have to actually do this for at least a year, and you have to have a bunch of clips, and you have to have done the job for a period of time.
It's good. I see. I applied for it probably last year or something. So yeah, I totally forgot the rules and the whole be there for a year thing. I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. But yeah, I had been writing longer than that. But it's really cool that you guys recognize not just one. Not even just one sport or not even just one, type of media. So that's really cool. And you had brought up fantasy baseball, and I know that's a big thing in your life as well and your work as well. Um, were you doing fantasy baseball? I'm pretty sure you brought this up, but were you doing fantasy baseball before you were doing fantasy football?
Um, hmm. I Yeah, I played my first fantasy baseball league right around the same time that I was. It was that same corporate gig where like
Hmm.
the football league spilled over into a baseball league. I think is what happened. And like baseball is such a different fantasy game. It's
Yeah.
such a different fantasy game. It's such a grind. You have to like if you win a like whatever. I don't mean to disrespect people who are great fantasy football players, but it's a different game.
Oh,
Like
it is.
it's marathoning versus like the 400 meters, the 800 meters. Those are hard. Those are really hard. But like winning a fantasy baseball league is like you're awake to see what is happening and who is blowing saves in the West Coast game every damn night, and like you're reacting to it, and it's just a grind. It's like a daily grind. And football is like you can draft well, check
Yeah.
in a couple times a week, nail a couple of waiver ads, and you've
Yep.
got it. Like
Yeah.
that ain't gonna fly in a competitive baseball league.
No, I was in a fantasy baseball league for 1 year, and then I was like, bye.
This
Couldn't do
year
it.
was wild.
Oh,
This
I
year
could
was
only assume.
like I came into this season thinking, oh man, anybody who wins a fantasy baseball league in 2020, that gets an asterisk. That's
Yeah, right.
60 games. What? That's nothing. But the number of like late scratches in games, the number of
Hmm.
people who, oh, that whole team has COVID, or, that whole team can't play for 2 weeks, like managing around stuff like that, managing around, the idea that, for the first month of the season, every starter on certain teams, they're going to pitch like 3 innings, not be eligible for wins or anything like that. We just had so many wrinkles this year that never come up.
Hmm.
It was wild. Like if you won a fantasy baseball league this year, like cheers to you. You earned it.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. I can barely deal with what's going on with football. With now there's a Tuesday night game. Oh, now there's it's just like there's football
Yeah.
almost every night
I
of the
feel
week.
like we're still in week 12. I feel like week
Yeah,
12 is still
it's just
happening.
stuck. We're just stuck there. We can't
Yeah.
get out of it. So with the whole COVID thing, because this is a different year for all of us, and did you think that there would be an NFL season before the season started?
Wow. Yeah, that's a good question. I had moments of doubt that there would be an NFL season. Like it's also one of those things where I felt pretty strongly that like a lot of jobs depended on it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
like there was never a point like, and obviously this was an internet fight that a lot of people were happening. Like if you expressed any skepticism about the notion that the season could start on time, people were accusing you of not wanting it to or rooting against it somehow. Like hell no. Like all of my professional friends, we depend on the NFL being there. Like if the
Yeah, for
NFL wasn't
sure.
there, I like who knows what happens to jobs. It's bad. It's really bad without the NFL. So I am grateful that it happened. Certainly, I am surprised. Maybe I shouldn't have been surprised coming off the baseball season, but baseball launched much closer to the actual start of all this, right? The real start of shutdowns and like our actual practical changing our way of life day in and day out. Football had more time to get ready. But football had some
Yeah.
time to prepare for this. So I have been shocked. Shocked is maybe strong, but I have been surprised that in both baseball and football, there has been a fair amount of like making it up as we go along. That's been a little surprising. Obviously, the NBA handled this really well, but they were in a very different place, very different situation than the NFL. I am glad it. I am glad that like I don't know. We're speaking on Tuesday night in the very end of week 13,
Yeah.
and who knows what's going to happen over the next month, but. I'm glad that like we're apparently not going to see a week 12 situation every week. Maybe we're not. Hopefully we're not.
Hopefully not. I can't even imagine. And I can't imagine if I assume that come Super Bowl time, it's going to be, the same kind of situation we're in right now. And, you're used to having Super Bowl Sunday. So
that's the one thing that I just really don't want. And I don't know. They can't bubble the whole league. I mean, football teams are huge, and the traveling parties are huge, and all that. And I'm sure they can't just like rent out Wyoming and bubble the whole, the whole league or whatever they'd have to do. But I don't want to see this come down to, Patrick Mahomes has an exposure to somebody on the COVID list and can't play in a playoff game, right? Like it can't go down that way.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see. I guess interested is the word to use here, to see what happens with the playoffs and with the Super Bowl and everything. So a little birdie told me that you are not a fan of PPR. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is an accurate thing to say. And I'm like 1,000 years old. So I was around for the birth of PPR. Like I know why it happened.
Right.
It wasn't PPR was a fix for what was a pretty regrettable situation, right? Like I don't know what year this would be like, but if we're drafting a fantasy league in like 1998, 1999, 2000, first round is all running backs. We've got young Randy Moss in the league. We've got great receivers in the league. We've got Jerry Rice still hanging on. We've got young Marvin Harrison, whatever. First round is all running backs. The first half of the second round is still all running backs, right? Like it was boring. Your fantasy draft was boring. It was just a recitation of running backs. That's all it was. And that was bad. So I get it. Like I get why we wanted to introduce the act of catching a football to the game as, more scoring is fun. Hey, let's have more points. That's cool. I totally understand why we do it. It shifted the landscape a little bit. You were, paying attention to some of the second tier receivers a little bit. They had value. It's fun. Yeah. The game fixed it. Like the game, like sort of fixed that problem. Now we have obviously everybody's running in a committee of some sort. There are very few like full workload feature backs. We don't even have to nobody's carrying the ball 280 times. It just simply doesn't happen. If you're seeing a ton of touches, there's a good chance that it's like Christian McCaffrey and like 100 of them are receptions.
Yeah.
There's so many situations in which the reception is just an extended handoff. These are not necessarily difficult passes at the NFL level. They are not, heroic acts of receiving or anything like that. There's a lot of short stuff in today's game. It's fine. It's fun. But if we're equating a catch for no gain, which happens all the time, to a 10-yard run, that's fundamentally wrong. It's fundamentally wrong. I like it when the fantasy version of the game values the same things that win in real life. I like quirky scoring. I'm not like, I know I'm a million years old, but I go on these anti-PPR diatribes, and it's not to say that I think we should all go back to like touchdowns only or, standard scoring only, but I like first down scoring. I like all kinds of deductions. I like, I like all kinds of stuff. I like points for completions and deductions for incompletions. I can get down with all that. I cannot get down with the idea that a catch for no gain has the same value as 10 rushing yards. It drives me crazy.
Okay. I'll give you that, because when we switched to PPR in our home league, it was right around that time where we have to do something, right? And everybody voted, yeah. And then the first game, I don't even remember what happened, what player it was, but it might've been Julian Edelman, caught a ball, didn't go anywhere, and got point for it. And this girl comes to me as a commissioner and is like, that's not fair. And I have to be
the whole essence of the game is the whole game is scoring and territory. Like that is fundamentally what football is, right? And I just don't get. I understand why we did it in the first place, but we should have gotten away from it. It is
Yeah.
not somehow more advanced. There's so many better ways to account for a whole bunch of positive plays that receivers and running backs and tight ends are giving us. Like first down scoring is fine, and it's also something that like you can appreciate as you're watching a game, right?
Right.
Like when it happens in front of you,
You
you
see
know
it.
that's
Yeah.
hey, I got a point for that, and it has real meaning within the actual game. And like just the fact of catching a dump off just doesn't do it for me.
Is that why Yahoo decided that .5 PPR, half point
Oh man,
PPR was going to
you should see the
be
internal
default?
emails when they blindsided us with that. I'm not proud of it. Like the notes that probably the least professional, I don't know, couple of days of my life. Like the notes that I was sending to our product team about their decision to go to half PPR, I was so mad. I
Well, at
was
least it's
so
not.
angry.
At least it's not full PPR. They're trying to help you out a little bit. Suffice, just a tiny
Maybe that
bit.
was them
Maybe.
throwing me a bone. I don't know.
I
It
don't
drove me
know.
crazy. I also I feel like at this point, it's
Hmm.
obviously predicting receptions is easier than predicting touchdowns. And there's a lot more
Yes.
noise to touchdowns. There's a lot more noise to a lot of things. Receptions are much more stable than that. Like I know week in and week out that Stephon Diggs is going to catch 6 or more balls. Like I just
Right.
know. Like it's a much easier thing to predict. So I can understand if you're like a member of the DFS community and you are like, you're trying to win money week to week and game to game on this stuff. I can understand why you'd want receptions and something that's super predictable in the game. I happen to like a lot of the randomness of sport. I happen to appreciate that. So you can just like, I feel like we're headed to just like point per snap. That's
Point per snap. How do you feel about tight end premium leagues?
They're kind of fun.
They're trying to like do the balancing thing too, because tight end's such a crap position.
Yeah, it's a little artificial. And maybe I wonder if it'll be like more people will try to adopt it next year because tight end has just been such a hellscape. But then all you're going to do is exaggerate the importance of Travis Kelce even more, which is a separate problem.
Or Taysom Hill, if no, I'm just kidding. We're not going to go there. We're not going to go there with the Taysom Hill scandal of 2020.
Hey, like Yahoo's had its own position eligibility scandals. Like I can't.
Oh yeah,
I
know. It's
really
always funny to me when people bring something up. It's like, okay, well, this also happened before. Do you not remember that? Or like when one app has an issue, and everybody's like, "I'm moving to a different app." A, no, you're not, and B,
you're going to go to the fantasy provider that is never going to have a problem with its app ever one time.
Find me one, please. Find me one, because that would solve a lot of issues in life. I have a couple of just like really small questions, real quick. My first one is, who's the worst fictional coach, and why?
Oh shit! It's Hackman from Hoosiers.
Yes. Okay.
He's terrible. He's terrible. He's legit terrible. To draw up the play that he draws up that Chitwood has to nix and say, dude, I'll make the shot. It's unbelievable that he draws that play up. Everything that he does, everything that's supposed to inspire you about that movie, every step that he takes along the way, every little decision he makes, they're all horrific. When he pulls the kid off the floor and decides to go 4-on-5, because the kid who's the best shooter on his team at that moment won't obey his like 4 pass before a shot thing that is archaic and awful. Oh, he's a terrible coach. He is. And I feel like all of the moment that we've arrived at in basketball history, like where we really understand the value of certain shots relative to other shots, I feel like it kind of validates my opinion on Hoosiers, which is he's just making terrible decisions. He's making horrific decisions for that entire movie, and the only reason they win is that they have Chitwood.
It's been a really long time since I saw that movie, so I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch it just so I can have like the anger in my heart that you do.
He's so bad.
Okay, and this could be totally not true. This could be totally not true, but we're gonna do the gossip section, and we're gonna say, does Steve Smith have beef with you?
Oh man, that was so long ago.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember.
That was so long ago. I think it might just be me and Denny Carter in the club of people that Steve Smith has come after.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember the exact circumstances, but I had written something. Steve Smith had moved on from the Panthers. He was no longer a Panther. And I think in my fantasy preview for the Panthers in that first season without Steve Smith, I had made I don't even know what the reference was to players who were no longer with the team, but it didn't even call out Steve Smith. And I don't know how he found it. I don't know who brought it to his attention, but it was just like an offhand jokey comment about ex Panthers. It's literally all it was, not Steve Smith specific in any way. And yeah, he came at me on Twitter, and he's Steve frickin' Smith, so he'll like throw hands if it comes to that, right? And I think, I tried to diffuse it a little bit because I was at the Bears playoff game where Steve Smith went off for like 200 some yards and single-handedly knocked the Bears out of the playoffs in an otherwise pretty good Bears season. And I made some reference to that, and his comeback was like, "Well, then you should damn well know better." And he's like he I don't know, he's got an edge to him. But I mean, I'm sure that's why he's among the best to ever do what he did.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You could have had my guy. So I wrote something about Jonathan Stewart being injury prone, and he just blocked me on Twitter. So I was like, all right, he just pulled the block. I was like, okay, well, fine, but it's true.
Yeah, it's a fine line because you realize, especially like, I don't know, as once you're on Twitter and once they have access to the things that you're writing, like, I don't know, there's real people behind all these injuries, and there's real people behind all this attention, and you want to be careful not to write in such a way that you're actually, that it gets personal.
And by the way, guys, if you do ever say anything about Jonathan Stewart, he searches his name because I did not tag him. So I'm just letting you know, if you have anything to say about him, well, yeah, I'd keep it to myself if I were you. I was going to ask you something else. I don't remember what it was, so I guess it's not that important. Yes, it is. Actually, it's the most important question. Who's going to be the Bears quarterback next week? Or not next week, man. Next year. Not next week. Next week, we wish, right? Next year.
I can't believe you're making me speculate. Scott Pianowski and I were just talking about this. I would, if I mean, it's going to be either Sam Darnold or Carson Wentz, right? Like, it's going to be somebody terrible. It's going to be somebody that I don't want to spend I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't feel that bad about Darnold. He's been dealt a difficult hand in his first few seasons, and maybe there's hope there. But like, I don't know, one of these, like, I'm not sure how the Carson Wentz contract can possibly be moved, but if it can be moved anywhere, it will be into my life. It will be into my life as a fan. That feels like, I mean, what franchise would actually take on Carson Wentz and his current set of problems after having just moved out of the Jay Cutler era? If it's any team, it's going to be the Bears. I'm not sure how that happens, but either Darnold or Wentz is probably going to be my next quarterback. I've wrapped my head around it.
Yeah, I mean, it's better to get it out of the way right now and just kind of face the music instead of having to wait.
I know. I feel like I've got a long period of time that I can process a little bit of this pain every day. I don't have to deal with it all at once.
I like Darnold. I do think he has been dealt a bad hand, and hopefully if he ends up in Chicago, he does. I mean, he can't do much worse than what's been going on. So
one of honestly, like, it was kind of funny in the moment, but one of the most difficult things that I've had to do on camera is, like, we're doing a live draft show in studio when the Bears took Trubisky. And I just absolutely 100% did not want it. Yeah. I wish I could say that Mahomes was my guy. And I liked him, but Deshaun Watson was my guy. And, like, how much different, and you know, whatever. They're both great. Mahomes is obviously as good as anybody's ever been, and Deshaun Watson, though, is still like Pro Bowl level quarterback, and Mitch is not. And I was just floored that it really came to pass, and I had to give, like, sort of, benign commentary on the draft pick while I was just, like, smoldering inside about what my team had just done.
It happens. I was kind of like that when the Cowboys drafted Zeke. I was like, really? With the fourth pick, I knew it was coming, but I'm like, now look where we are. So before I let you go, I'm gonna do two things. One, I'm gonna have you tell me some advice just for the people listening that want to get involved in fantasy football, like the actual industry, whether it be a small site, big site, whatever. They want to get their foot in the door. They want to do something, but they're not exactly sure how to start or what they need, what they need to do to kind of get the attention from people so that they'll have an audience. So what kind of advice do you have to those people?
It's a super welcoming industry. I hope that you feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that like everybody who's just kind of thrown themselves in, like there's just a lot of success stories along the
Right.
way. Like, nobody goes to fantasy sports school. There's no like,
No.
there's no program for this or anything like that. Like people do it organically because they love playing the game and they love talking it and
Mm-hmm.
they love participating in the sort of community discussion that goes on game days and whatnot and be part of that. Like, it's just never been easier to get noticed in some respects. And also, like, I don't know if there's something that you're curious about in sport that you don't think has been well researched. Like, I don't know. Look at Harmon just decided,
Yep.
you know what? I'm going to launch reception perception. Here's an interesting problem, and I'm going to help solve it for the people. And like somebody devised air yards, and
Mm-hmm.
people started tracking stuff in the NFL that wasn't getting tracked before, and it's super useful. Like find a niche and fill it is one thing that people can do, and another thing is just to again interact with me, interact with you, interact with people who are already doing it, and make sure those are positive interactions, and it goes a long way.
Excellent. Yeah. Great advice. For real. Anytime anybody wants to reach out to me or Andy's saying it as well, you
Yeah.
can go ahead and just hit us up. I mean, I've talked to people about, they're like, well, I'm a girl, I'm a woman, and I want to be a part of the industry, but I'm scared about that and this, that, and the other. And, don't worry about it. Just do your thing and just be you. So go ahead and tell everyone where they can find you, what you've been working on, and, all that fun stuff.
They can find me on Twitter. I'm just at Andy Behrens. I never gave myself like a fun Twitter moniker. I probably should have done that at some point. It's too late to change it. So I'm just at Andy Behrens on Twitter. I mean, I'm happy to go back and forth with anybody about anything. And please check out, there's the Yahoo Fantasy Football Forecast podcast that we've been doing every day of the game week. We've got Fantasy Football Live on Sunday mornings, 90 minutes before kickoff. That is the production miracle that we were talking about earlier.
That's awesome. Well, I want everybody to go check out Andy's stuff. And if you guys think that there's a worse fictional coach than who he said, go ahead. We'll argue with you over that as well. So, all right, guys, have a great week, and we'll be back next time.